your seats at 11:15, so 11 minutes.
Can anyone hear me?
That's good. Hear me? Can people hear me? Can everyone hear me? Is it coming through the microphone? It is? It's soft? What about now? Well, I don't know how to fix it, so this is what we're doing. It's good? Okay. Well, it's going to be hard to get it to quiet down, but... Okay, if everyone can take their seats, I assume we'll have more people trickling in as the lecture goes on, but I guess we'll get started. So I'm going to talk to you all about debating econ impacts. This lecture obviously has a lot of overlap with the lecture you just heard from Dr. Bricker, and it's going to have a lot of overlap with some of the lectures you're going to get in the future, specifically the CapK/DDev lecture. And so I want to preface everything I say here with some of what I say is kind of just my opinion, kind of some things that I've learned in debate. And so there are people much smarter than me, much brighter than me, much more well-educated on this stuff that may have different opinions than me. So don't take anything I say here as a hard, fast rule of how you need to debate econ impacts. Just take it as a sort of an idea of how you can do it. One potential way that you can successfully debate econ impacts, and who knows, maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't, but this is just one way to go about doing things. The second thing that I want to start with is that I'm hoping to make this more of like a Socratic seminar, so I'm not going to just talk at you. I'm going to be posing questions, and you all have the opportunity to make this lecture as good as it possibly can be by actively listening, actively engaging with me, and if you do that, I'll actively engage with you. So when I ask a question, I would appreciate if we had volunteers who raise their hands. I will call on you, you'll give an answer, we'll talk through it, and we'll see if there are different directions that we can go based off of that answer. My request to you is that you be active, you be engaged, you try to listen, that we have a diversity of people who respond to the questions that I ask, and also when you answer the question that you speak up, because we want everyone to hear what you're saying. That make sense? Third thing, which probably should have been the first thing, my name is Zahir. I am in the BEKS lab, and yeah, that's my introduction. So, first question. What's the most common impact to econ decline? When people read an econ DA, what do they say happens? Yeah. Okay, let's be a little bit more general. Let's not get into the specifics yet. Yeah. Nuclear war. Sure. Global conflict initiation. Does everyone agree that that is usually the most common impact that we see to the econ DA? Yeah? So what are some other potential impacts to econ decline? And we'll touch on this a little bit later too, so we're not going to get an exhaustive list now, but just to sort of set the stage, what are some other impacts? Yeah. Sorry? Poverty? What's the first word you're saying? Very descriptive, an impressive vocabulary. But yes, poverty, inequality, a declining economy hurts the general economic conditions for everyone throughout the economy, and rising economic conditions are beneficial for everyone throughout the economy. You know, a rising boat lifts, or a rising tide lifts all the boats. Yeah. Hedge, leadership, global influence, diplomacy, our ability to successfully interact with other countries. I like all of this, but there is a sort of very US-centric focus to what we're talking about. Given how relevant and important the US is for the global economy, if the US economy were to decline, which is what any econ advantage or any econ disadvantage says is going to happen, there would be large implications for the globe, right? Markets are interconnected. We live in an era of globalization. Everything is interconnected. So what is another example of something that could happen if the U.S. economy declines? Yeah, so Chinese hedge is thematically similar to the U.S. hedge thing. Like the consequences of the U.S. losing global leadership would be that some other country fills the vacuum, whether that be China, whether that be Russia, Iran, North Korea, whatever. Democracy, yeah. Are you talking, explain that a little bit more. Yeah, and that, again, is very thematically similar to the U.S. leadership argument, right? A lot of these things focus on the U.S. standing in the international sphere and relative to other countries. I want to try to break away a little bit from that and see if there are any impacts to the U.S. economy that don't have to do necessarily with what happens to the U.S. Exactly. That's sort of what I was trying to get at. The ramifications that economic decline could have for international trade and the geopolitical consequences of a decline in trade, and also the fact that a U.S. economic decline could have massive implications for the economies of other countries. China, Russia, Brazil, India, all of those countries. What I'm trying to say here is that there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different avenues and paths that you can debate econ impacts. And you shouldn't just limit yourself to talking about the simple econ decline causes nuclear war, right? There's a lot of different avenues you can go with this. And given that this is an econ-intensive topic, given what Dr. Bricker talked about, that a lot of AFs will claim to have econ advantages or will claim to have some sort of uniqueness or link argument that interacts with the economy, it seems to be of the utmost importance when you're trying to go for an economy impact that you find a way to make that external offense. Does everyone know what I mean by that? Are we on the same page? Okay. That being said, this lecture would kind of be incomplete if we didn't talk about that first impact that was mentioned, which is econ decline causing nuclear war. So, someone mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to bring back the question. What are the reasons that economic decline could result in the initiation of global conflict? Yeah. Yeah. So the ramifications that a decline in the U.S. economy could have for the status of the dollar as the global reserve currency, that has implications for our ability to effectively impose sanctions on countries that we think are behaving poorly. It has implications for global trade, given that most of it is conducted in U.S. dollars. So there are certainly impacts that happen as a result, or impacts that happen to the dollar as a result of the economy declining. And the dollar obviously has a lot of global implications, geopolitical ones. Yeah. Yes, that's the one I was kind of thinking of, diversionary war. So in political science, it's the foremost explanation for why economic decline leads to conflict initiation. Can someone give me a pretty quick explanation of what they think diversionary war is? Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, that's a pretty good explanation. When political leaders are faced with difficult domestic situations, and in this instance, obviously, the difficult domestic situation that we're talking about is an economic decline. That has ramifications for how the public feels about the government. If you have ever watched any of these like presidential election cycles, midterm election cycles, any sort of campaign, the economy is one of the foremost issues that everyone discusses, and people blame political leaders for economic activity that they really have no control over. Does everyone remember when everyone was blaming Biden because gas prices were super high, even though it had nothing to do with it? Not to get political. But that is an example of how people take out their frustration with economic conditions onto the government. People vote with their pocketbooks. Do people know what that means? Someone tell me. I saw you shaking your or nodding your head, so go ahead.
Basically, they're influencing the election because they candidates and how they vote in Congress.
Not quite. What I mean by that is that people will vote for candidates or for leaders that they think will put the most money in their pocket. People are selfish. If I think that if I vote for Biden, my salary is going to be X every single year, and the amount that I take home is going to be X because of the tax rates that Biden's administration will impose, and I think my income will be Y if Trump wins, and my take-home income will be Y because of the taxes that Trump will impose, I'm going to go for whatever is the higher number. And perhaps we are all more moral people than just voting on what's going to end up in our wallets, but most people are not. Most people vote on whatever is going to get them the most money. The reason I say this is that leaders are very, very in tune with economic conditions and want to do whatever they can to try to make the economy as good as possible. And if the economy is not doing well, they want to do whatever they can to make sure people don't focus on that. Well, what's the easiest way to make sure that people don't focus on the economy? What's one of the only other things that could captivate the American public more so than economic strife? Going to war, conflict initiation. So the theory in political science is that leaders will divert, diversionary, public attention away from economic problems, the problems that are going on with their wages, everything that they're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis with the economy, by getting them to collectively focus on a different threat, a different issue. That issue being a war. Now, this strategy has a name for when leaders try to get for the sake of this example, the American public to come together and focus on something else collectively that is not the economy. Does anyone know what that phenomena is called? Yes, the rally around the flag effect. Leaders will divert attention away from the economy in an attempt to get the populace to rally around the flag. And the definition of rally around the flag is like self-explanatory. It goes hand in hand with diversionary war. And the easiest way to get the American public to come together is to get into a war. Does anyone know what George Bush's approval rating was after 9/11? George Bush's approval rating after we started the wars in the Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq, was about 90%. That's crazy. But it is a very salient example of how when conflict is initiated, it can successfully distract the American public from other problems that are going on and generate a sense of collectiveness amongst the people. So, this is a tool in leaders' arsenals. They can initiate conflict and start a war to try to save their own skin and distract people from economic conditions. So do we see how those two phenomena in political science are a pretty good explanation of why economic decline could lead to conflict initiation? Does that make sense? Are there any questions about that? Okay. We talked about some of the diversionary war stuff. Are there other reasons econ decline could cause nuclear war? Okay, yeah.
The erosion of norms, global norms, like the nuclear proliferation, can cause some of our allies to fast towards access to weapons proliferate, then all their neighbors also start to proliferate, and it becomes like
So I want to take a couple steps back. The economy declines, and then walk me through what happens to the NPT.
the economy declines, which is associated with the decline of U.S. hegemony. So the allies that had this perception of a nuclear umbrella, that the U.S. was working to protect them, now feel threatened
Yeah. So what you're saying is another example of leadership impacts, right? How it has ramifications for U.S. leadership, whether it be in our alliance commitments, whether it be in the NPT, things like that. And yes, as we discussed before, that is obviously a very good example of impacts that we can have to economic decline. But I'm asking more so about the direct connection between economic decline and conflict initiation that does not depend on diversionary war, but also doesn't depend on U.S. leadership or other impact stuff. Yeah? Okay. In the interest of being honest, not totally the direction I was trying to head, but I guess. Yeah, interdependence. And not just interdependence, but kind of what we talked about earlier, global trade, our interactions with other countries, and the fact that, a lot of people say, I'm sure a lot of the impact defense cards that you've read to China war, Russia war with anyone, say that economic interdependence is a really big reason that these countries don't go to war, right? Why would you go to war with someone that your economy depends on? But if the economy declines and you're in a situation where trade expectations have come down, then it removes one of the key reasons why you would not initiate conflict with an adversary. That make sense? Why would we go to war with China? We depend so much on their goods. We depend so much on their trade. So really, pragmatically, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to go to war with them, right? It would hurt us just as much as it hurts them. And not even talking about the costs of war. Just talking about, the economic costs of going into a conflict with one of our biggest trade partners. We'd never go to war with Mexico, right? And part of the reason why is not because we have some sacred pact with Mexico, but because they're one of our largest trading partners. But if the economy declines, it takes away one of the largest barriers, impediments that is preventing leaders from initiating conflict with other countries. Does everyone get what I mean by that? It depends. It depends. There's a lot of explanations for sort of the direction with which a war would start. But for your purposes, now it's important to think back further up the chain of where we're talking about the economy, right? If the internal link to your impact is that the U.S. economy declines, you need to make sure that your explanation of your impact is predicated on the U.S. economy declining, right? You don't want to read an internal link to U.S. econ decline and then read an impact to something that is not that. So you have to think through what impact most thematically fits with your internal link. What about COVID? And with this, other recessions. Why didn't they cause war? I'm sure anytime someone reads an econ impact, you hear COVID disproves it. We had a huge decline and we didn't go to war. It seems to be a mainstay, staple of everyone's answers to econ impacts, which is it's the untrained eye that says something like that. It is easy to say COVID was an econ decline and there was no war, and it was a pretty big one, but there's a little bit of nuance that we're missing. So in any of the previous lectures or in lab, have you learned about monetary policy? Seeing people nodding their heads. Do we feel confident knowing what monetary policy is? Someone explain what monetary policy is. What do they specifically want to target? No, that's what they change. When you change an interest rate, what economic condition are you trying to change? Remember, there's only two economic conditions, supply and demand. So which one are they trying to change? Yeah. 50-50 shot. It was supply or demand, and you said unemployment. Demand, yeah. So the Federal Reserve is trying to change demand in order to either heat up or cool down the economy. Do people know what I mean when I say heat up or cool down the economy? We seem... If someone does not know, please ask now if you don't know what I mean by that. Yeah, yep. So cooling down the economy means there's less economic activity. An economy heating up means that there's more economic activity. Follow-up question to that, what's going on with the economy right now? And I don't mean at this exact moment, but let's say take a trend of the last 12 months. Is the economy heating up or cooling down? Okay, I'm hearing about a 50-50 split between both. So someone raise your hand, 50-50 shot. Don't go with unemployment again. Yeah. Yeah. What? We're 0 for 2. The economy's been heating up. The economy's been heating up. Rising inflation is the best indicator that the economy is heating up. Because it's not just about is the economy growing or not. It is about the amount of economic activity that is taking place. And inflation is a key economic indicator that the economy is heating up. In economics, the phenomena whereby the economy there's too much inflation, it is referred to having an overheating economy. So if inflation is increasing, we're heating up. We're going to hit on one of these 50-50s eventually. Okay, so we know about monetary policy. So when there is a recession, this will be a good chance for us to get one of these 50-50s right. When there is a recession, what does the Federal Reserve want to do to try to stabilize the economy in the instance of a recession? Yes, you want to lower interest rates. So the Fed wants to lower interest rates because when there is a recession, the Fed wants to stimulate demand. I don't want to get too into the monetary policy stuff, but take, for example, if I were taking out a loan, and if I could get $100 today, and it's a loan for 5 years, and eventually I owe the person who gave me the loan $100 when I finish, I would take out that loan. There's no interest. And I get the upfront money now, I get to pay it over time, and it makes no difference to me. Any of us in that situation would take out the loan. That's what the Federal Reserve is trying to do. When they lower interest rates, they're trying to stimulate demand by making it smart to take out loans, spend money, and get the economy going again. When the Fed is raising interest rates, they are trying to slow down demand. They are trying to incentivize everyone to stop spending so much and to start saving some money. So what's been going on right now? What has the Fed been doing right now? Need you to raise your hand and answer. Yeah, the Fed has been raising interest rates. They're trying to incentivize people to save. And they're doing that in response to inflation. You want to slow down economic activity when inflation is taking place, so they're raising interest rates. They're incentivizing people to save. Does that make sense? So let's think about the implications of this for econ decline impacts. Let's say that you read an internal link to economic decline, and someone says previous crisis, previous recessions, previous economic declines have not resulted in war. What is a way that you can take this sort of discussion we've had about monetary policy and apply it to this argument? Exactly. Well, not exactly, but mostly. when we have recessions, the Federal Reserve was able to flexibly lower interest rates in order to stimulate the economy back up. When COVID happened, the Fed massively dropped interest rates to try to stimulate demand, right? They do that to try to stimulate the economy and avoid the worst impacts of a recession. Thing is, the interest rates can't go below zero. They're giving away free money if that happens, right? So, what does that say about previous crises and the likelihood that the next one will cause conflict? Exactly. A lot of people, this is another thing, where people with just no context whatsoever will say, in response to econ impacts, the economy is resilient. What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. Those are meaningless words. When the Fed has reduced interest rates down to zero, that has removed the flexibility of the Fed to respond to the next crisis. If another crisis happens after that, the Fed has nowhere lower to go to stimulate demand. When that's the case, the government has to turn to other things to try to fix the economy, which gets us back to conflict initiation. Larry Summers, who is the former Secretary of the Treasury, he talks about the zero lower bound. When interest rates have hit zero, that is what is referred to as the zero lower bound. We can't go lower than that. So if the Fed doesn't have the ability to respond to an economic crisis by lowering interest rates, by stimulating demand, the economy is in real trouble and ensures that each successive crisis is going to be worse than the one that came before it. That means that the scale of the collapse that happens as a result of the plan or absent the plan is larger than what happened in the instance of COVID. But that is in a situation where we have really low interest rates, which, who knows, over the course of the season, interest rates could fluctuate a lot. So we'll see. That could be useful. But we're in a situation now where we have high interest rates, right? Like we talked about, the Fed is trying to slow down inflation to try to, by raising interest rates, yeah? I think the interest rates DA, what the DISAD says is that the plan results in more inflation. Now, I haven't read this, so I'm guessing. So correct me if I'm wrong. The plan results in more inflation, which causes the Fed, in reaction to that, to jack up interest rates more. The point of jacking up interest rates is to slow the economy down. But they overstep, they go too far, and that collapses the economy. Does that sound about right? So a good analogy for this is another Larry Summers quote. He has this thing where he describes interest rates as when you visit a hotel. And there's one of two ways that you can use a hotel shower the first time you get there. Is you can either be an idiot and just turn it up as hot as you can to just see how far that thing goes. When you step in the shower, you're going to burn yourself. You can cool it down, but the damage has already been done. You've already burned your skin. Or you can do the intelligent thing. You get in the shower, and you slowly turn up the heat a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, until it gets to a comfortable temperature. Right? That's what you're supposed to do. The Fed, in reaction to the plan, is the former. The Fed sees the plan happen, sees a massive expenditure about to take place that will have a dramatic effect on inflation, and says, okay, we're turning that shower all the way up. That is referred to as a hard landing. Right? Is everyone familiar with what I mean by hard landing? Okay, so the plan causes the Fed to have to take a very hard landing. These are examples of distinctions that you can make that distinguish the crisis the plan would result in relative to previous economic crisis. Like Dr. Bricker said, you need to make comparative arguments about why the scale of your collapse is bigger than those previous ones. These arguments about monetary policy, inflation, hard landings, the zero lower bound, the shower analogy, are all examples of how you can make those distinctions and make those comparative claims. That make sense? So I would encourage you to not give speeches on the economy that just throw out things like COVID disproves, the economy is resilient, '08 disproves. There are very different underlying economic conditions that determine the way that we respond to each individual recession. There's not a blueprint that the government has that says when there is a recession, we do X, Y, and Z. As a result of that, you can make claims about why the scale of your collapse, the magnitude of your internal link, determines the way that the government would respond to it. Does anyone have any questions about any of that? Usually quarterly. Yeah. So a hard landing just means that the government aggressively tamped down on inflation and went a little bit too far in terms of slowing down demand in the economy. So I think the most salient example is the inflation in the 70s and 80s. And I think some of the cards in the dissad talk about that. I think that, are you asking my opinion? Yeah. I think Larry Summers is one of the brightest economists we have. He was the Secretary of the Treasury. Who am I to be like Larry Summers is an idiot? As for what you're saying, kind of disproven by the fact that the Fed has been raising interest rates and we haven't had a hard landing. I mean, interest rates are pretty high right now. If you don't have your money, or if your parents don't have their money in a high-yield savings account right now, tell them to get on it. You're making a lot of money. Tell them that at debate camp, you got a lecture about why they need to put their money in a high-yield savings account. I think they'll really appreciate that. Any other questions? Yeah.
Didn't Japan negative interest rates for quite a while and still is?
Yeah, but the U.S. wouldn't do that. The scale of borrowing in the U.S. suggests that it would be crazy for the Fed to ever undertake negative interest rates. Yeah. If you want to research some of this stuff, the search term is zero lower bound, and I don't know what search terms you'd use for the shower analogy, but we all good to move on? We kind of talked about this already, but we can unpack it a little bit further. Econ decline happens, and this now I'm not just talking about external impacts, the way that you generate external offense. I'm also talking about now turns case arguments. So what are some turns case arguments you can make based on econ decline? We have our external big thing, nuclear war. Now, how do we turn the case? Tell me more. Yeah, so when the economy declines, when a lot of people talk about 2008, when a lot of people talk about COVID, one of the most salient ways that they discuss the adverse impacts that were had on the economy is that a lot of people lost their jobs, right? When the economy goes down, when economic conditions are not as good, to sell whatever it is your business is selling, and every business is in the business of selling. So when the economic conditions for that are not good, you have to cut costs somewhere. And a lot of the ways that these businesses cut costs is they just get rid of people's jobs. So unemployment goes up, and that is the step from unemployment to worse inequality is not that big of a step. What else? Yeah. 100%. So a lot of people are reading environment impacts on this topic, it seems. So it does seem important to make sure that you have a good argument for why the economy turns the environment. And that is a really good one. That when economic conditions in the U.S. aren't very good, and the investment opportunities in the U.S. aren't very good because the economy's in shambles or whatever, you relocate to a place that has better economic conditions for you, for your business at a given time, which is a phenomenon referred to as offshoring. But also, the place where you move to conduct your business in the future may have less strict environmental regulations that your company needs to comply with. That's one example of how the decline in the economy can adversarially impact the environment. There's a bunch of people that respond to the CAPK, that respond to DDEV, that say that the only way to get ourselves out of the environmental crisis is to grow our way out of it. And that means having stable economic conditions that allow for the creation and cultivation of alternative energy, renewable energy, geoengineering, tactics that allow us to dampen the current environmental stressors, current environmental impacts. So, when people say warming, or people say stuff about the environment, there's a very good turns case argument about how a declining economy would impact the environment. So we have inequality, we have warming. Fair. The only problem I have with that is that it's basically an argument about why nuclear war turns nuclear war, which I agree with. But we want to talk about more so how econ decline turns other external impacts. There's one that everyone talked about during the first slide that we haven't talked about now, which I'm surprised by. Well, so that sort of runs into the problem of the other answer, which is we're talking about war turns war, almost. And we're still talking about our impact. There's one that at least 6 people mentioned during the first slide that we haven't talked about now. So much so that I had to be like, we can't talk about that one anymore. Yep. Econ decline turns leadership. The explanation for that is sort of self-explanatory. It dampens our credibility in international institutions. It makes our ability to work with other countries in multilateral forums a lot harder, and it dampens international trade to the point that we're not able to successfully exert influence over other countries because trade is an important geopolitical tool that allows us to influence the behavior of other countries. So, yeah, I mean, those are like the 3 big examples that I was thinking of. Inequality, warming, and leadership, which seem to be 3 big themes, 3 big impacts on this topic. So the way that I would want to see this implemented in a debate, or when you're preparing for the season and you're writing your econ DA, is don't just cut cards and say econ decline causes nuclear war and say like, okay, I'm done with my impact section of the DA. No. You should be cutting turns case arguments for econ decline for every scenario that you can think of. Econ decline causes China war, causes Russia war, trade, hedge, leadership, climate, inequality, any advantage that you can think of. It has two benefits. One is it allows you to read a piece of evidence on the disad turning the case anytime you decide to extend this disad, right? And you're not doing impact calc that's just nuclear war hurts the environment, which is the worst form of impact calc possible. You're actually talking about what your impact is when you're comparing it to the other teams. And second of all, is it allows you or avoids the situation where you can't get external offense, right? You may be in a situation where, say, your econ impact in the 1NC says that the following wars would happen: Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And then you debate an AF that says, we solve a Russia war, we solve a China war, we solve an Iran war, we solve a North Korea war. You're in a lot of trouble if you don't have a pretty exhaustive impact section to your disad. But if you do what I'm saying now, then you'll guarantee that you'll always have something external to say. And does it make sense why it would be strategic to do that? Okay. So that leads into impact calculus. Someone tell me why econ decline is a bigger, better, stronger impact than something else. Do some impact calc. Sure. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, and the thing, I want to take the question just one step back. You know, there's like the three prongs of impact calculus: probability, time frame, and magnitude. And I'll take a quick second to say that, and my lab has already heard this, probability, time frame, and magnitude. The reason you are taught those three things as like the way to do impact calculus when you're a novice is because that is the right way to do it. And then, as you progress through your debate career, you get to the point where you all are now, where you're like juniors and seniors. You say, I'm way too cool to be saying probability, time frame, and magnitude. And then, as you progress further, and you get into college, and you're in like your junior, senior year of college, you'd be like, no, I probably should go back to saying probability, time frame, and magnitude. That's like the right way to do impact calc. So, I personally would love if that's the way that everyone did impact calc. With that in mind, with those three like prongs of impact calculus in mind, what's the one that we would want to maybe focus on for econ decline? Yeah, time frame. Does that make sense to everyone why time frame would be kind of the best one for econ decline? Why does time frame matter? Why is time frame more important than magnitude or probability? Fair. Not really the direction I was going, but fair.
Delay deficit that's like that takes a long time to implement, but econ decline happens now, which means that can't solve tomorrow.
Not quite. Not quite. Yeah. So time frame matters more than magnitude and probability because time frame controls the direction of Turn's case. How could an impact that happens later than another one turn the other one? That doesn't make any sense. So if your impact happens faster, it determines Turn's case. Does it make sense what I mean when I say that? If you say that warming turns econ decline, but warming doesn't do that until 2050, and I say that econ decline turns warming, but my thing happens by 2030, how could the former be true? It can't, right? So this is where everything kind of all comes together. The best impact calc argument for the econ DA, in my opinion, is time frame. Time frame matters because it determines the direction of turning the case or turning the DA. And the reason you cut so many impacts for your econ DA is that so you can have a piece of evidence for every Turn's case argument you make. That 2NR that says we have a huge external impact. Econ decline causes nuclear war. And it's faster than any of their impacts because the Fed's reaction happens immediately, right? The thing is that the plan doesn't need to go into effect for the Fed to freak out, right? The Fed bases its decisions on expectations of what they believe will happen to the economy. So it takes a long time for the redistribution that the app says is good and is important to take place and have a material effect on things like inequality, warming, what have you. But the Fed's reaction to that redistribution happens immediately. They will respond to the plan by very quickly raising interest rates, hard landing. So now you're faster, but time frame matters because it controls the direction of Turn's case. Then you've read a piece of evidence that says that your disad turns every single AF impact. Tough for me to envision a world where that 2NR loses if you win that set of arguments, regardless of what's going on in the rest of the DA, because it suggests to me that if you win that set of arguments, you are decidedly ahead on the impact part of the debate. And if you're decidedly ahead on the impact part of the debate and you're turning the case, I don't really think you can lose. So it seems like this would be a good area to invest in terms of cutting cards, because remember, a large part of this depends on you having a good set of evidence that you turn the case. And I also would encourage people to try optimizing your econ DA overviews. Like, give them again and again and again, and rewrite them again and again and again until you've got it locked down, because there's a pretty good argument to be made that you could use it or need it in pretty much every single debate that you have this year. You're not going to use it, but you could. So that's my pitch for working on your econ DA overview and making it as good as it can be. Flip side, why does econ decline not cause war? Interesting, in that it has a thematically similar explanation to rallying around the flag and diversionary war, right? Both that explanation and diversionary war focus on how people would react, the public would react to an economic decline. Let me pose this question. Let's say you're the president of the United States. You're Joe Biden. The economy takes a sharp downturn. We have a hard landing. People are freaking out. You're getting ready for the 24 election. People are blaming you for everything that's happening with the economy. You decide that your way out of this problem is you're going to start a war. That's your way out. Who would you start a war with? Exactly. Do you know how crazy it would be for your response to things don't look so good for me right now? I'm going to start a nuclear war with China. I'm going to start a nuclear war with Russia. I will turn Ukraine into a parking lot. That's not good politics. Alternatively, you could start a war with someone that you know you can beat. You know won't cost too many American lives, right? Small countries, non-nuclear countries, in non-geopolitically significant areas, right? So with that in mind, that's a very good defensive argument. Because if the AF's claim is diversionary war, it'd say if diversionary war is true, we would not initiate a conflict with a nuclear power. The war would never get to the nuclear level. Because who in their right mind would decide that that's the way out of the pressures of economic decline? Right? I'm going to modify your answer a little bit because you are on the right track. But interdependence, isn't there a fairly good argument for when the economy is facing a lot of pressure, you actually want to increase or stimulate the amount of trade that you're doing? You want to get resources from other countries on the cheap to try to help preserve what's left of your economy? Wouldn't it make you far less likely to want to fight because you already have so much going on that you need to deal with? Right? So there's a good argument to be made that it can help or strengthen interdependence. The last one is mutually assured destruction. Now, there's a lot of others. Institutions prevent you from going into war, a lot of things like that. But the other one is mutually assured destruction. Just the premise that going to war and using nuclear weapons, no country will ever, the cost-benefit calculation will never get to a point where a country decides that it's worthwhile to initiate nuclear conflict. And a lot of evidence says that interdependence, mutually assured destruction, those kind of things prevent war from ever breaking out regardless of economic conditions that take place. Cards. So I looked through some of the evidence on econ decline causes war, econ decline doesn't cause war, to try to get a good sense of cards that you all can read and give you a little bit of like a pro, a con, what's good about these cards, what's not. So first card I saw is this Zolik card. The good thing about Zolik is that it's very recent. It explicitly assumes previous crises, like COVID, and says explicitly, the next crisis will be worse. So that helps you substantiate the argument that answers the claim that, oh wait, COVID, whatever, thump. That's a good card. And it also explicitly says the word extinction. So it's a good card. It's an econ decline impact, and it says all those things. I would read that card. That card's good. Mavac card, which I think is the one that's most commonly being read, if I had to guess. It's recent. It assumes COVID. It laundry lists hotspots where conflict could break out, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about finding other countries or areas that would be impacted by U.S. economic decline. So it explicitly lays out India, Pakistan, Iran, North Korea, China, Russia, all those countries. And it says that those all could escalate and result in a nuclear war. So that's good. One of the cons of MAVAC is that people have been reading this recutting of it that says that like global poverty and global economic conditions doom the economy to collapse forever. And so people have re-highlighted MAVAC to say that the neg does not have a unique internal link to the economy because MAVAC makes a structural uniqueness argument about the viability of the economy. So something to be aware of if you decide to read that card. That's been a very common response to that card. Lou 18, very qualified from a PhD in economics, so that's obviously good. Empirical uses examples of Yemen and Syria of conflict initiation. Explicitly says that it could also result in terrorism, so that's another way that you could get external. Problem with Lou is that it falls into the potential trap of if a war broke out, we would potentially start a war with a much smaller country. And it doesn't get close to establishing the nuclear great power war that you want to get to with an econ impact. Reading Lou as like a supplementary card to say like empirical evidence and most qualified authors agree with our understanding of economics and political science You totally could, but I wouldn't feel super confident making that my only card for Econ Decline Causes War. Tonneson is about trade expectations, negative trade expectations, but it does explicitly say that economic decline upends nuclear deterrence. So if someone is really focused on saying that mutually assured destruction is the reason that nuclear war will never break out as a result of economic decline, Tonneson does explicitly answer that and says that economic decline upends traditional deterrence mechanisms that prevent war. So that's one thing for that. Haas is a good card. It's on the older side, doesn't assume COVID, but does make a very good comparative argument about why it's the most important thing for U.S. leadership. So if you were looking for a card, I would kind of tell you to cut a newer one, cut a better one. But if you were looking for a card now that says the turns leadership thing, I would read Haas. On the defensive side, Clary, 15, good card. Does explicitly say the thing that's economic decline does not statistically result in an increase in conflict initiation. Good part about that card is that it uses a statistical analysis and an empirical analysis to assess the claim of whether or not economic decline structurally increases the likelihood of war. Some people have said that the statistical analysis that Clary does, which is a rare events regression, systemically biases Clary's data set against conflict initiation and makes his findings suspect. So there's a debate to be had there about whether Clary's statistical analysis is good or bad. So if you're AF and choosing an impact defense card, just be aware that that indite is something that the neg will likely say, and you should be prepared to defend it. Walt is another piece of AF impact defense. I'm dividing it by AF and neg, but it's offense defense. Is everyone following that? Okay. Walt is very good, very qualified. It is, very good, very qualified, very well warranted. The downside with Walt is that one of the concluding paragraphs does say that prolonged adverse economic conditions could increase the, quote, war-prone condition. So Walt is saying that short-term blips, small in terms of time frame but large in terms of magnitude collapses don't result in the initiation of conflict. But if those conflicts if that economic condition becomes prolonged, then the war-prone condition, which is the phrase that Walt uses, increases. So if you're AF, reading that defensive card, be aware that this is something that the neg could say. And if you're neg, say that. But then you also have to connect your impact to a long-term thing, right? Those are the cards I saw. I'm sure there's plenty more, but those are the ones I saw. So, I mean, take a critical eye to your econ impacts. Don't just plug and play with whatever you see. Do some reading for yourself and see which one you like the best and which one you feel the most confident explaining, because that's the only thing that matters. So, any questions? I mean, I know that we kind of went through this whole thing and we had a bunch of questions, but if you have lingering ones about the economy writ large, the econ disad, econ impacts, anything econ related, please feel free to ask them now, or you can ask them to me later, and if you do, just make sure to rule of 3. Yeah, I would say each crisis is unique. And that goes back to discussing the scale of your internal link argument. You should say that given current economic conditions, given our argument is that the Fed would overreact to the plan and cause a hard landing, that hard landing is worse than the problems that have existed with other crises. So it's about the scale of your internal link alongside being able to confidently explain the economic conditions that distinguish your internal link from other internal links. Any other questions? Oh, yeah. Probability is a difficult thing to conceptualize in terms of the relative probability of other impacts versus other ones, just because the way that you assess the likelihood that something will occur, you have to look at the cumulative internal link chain of those set of events. And so it is far more dependent on the explanation of the rest of the disad to say that your impact is the most probable. Simultaneously, a lot of the reasons that people say that warming is the most probable impact is that there is clear scientific consensus that warming is likely to, and in fact the most likely thing that will cause extinction of humanity, right? There is not said consensus on this question of econ decline causing war. And the AF could say, hypothetically, that previous declines, previous recessions, and the fact that they did not result in conflict initiation suggests that the probability of the impact is not that high. The reason I said time frame is the most important is because I really like the argument that is our internal link is about how the Fed reacts to the plan, which happens immediately because the Fed is making decisions based on what they think economic conditions will look like, right? Whereas the AF's redistribution takes a long time to happen, to actually have a material effect on inequality, global warming, things like that. So the Fed overreacting very quickly to the plan happens significantly faster than the AF impacts, and that determines the direction of which impacts turn the other ones. Other questions? Okay, cool, thanks.